So now we're going to cover Jefferson's policies and Jefferson and the courts, the second section part of 9-1. So Thomas Jefferson will take over in the spring of 1801, and he becomes the first president ever to be inaugurated in Washington, D.C. As we spoke in class, this is sometimes referred to as the Revolution of 1800. And the reason it was called the Revolution of 1800 is when Jefferson takes control of the presidency, this is the first time that power shifts from one group to the opposition, the opposing side, and it did so very peacefully. And the idea is that you have to think about the world in which they lived, in which most of the time when opposition groups took power, they took power in a violent way. This was done through an election, which one side won and the other side lost. And so basically John Adams did not like this. He disliked it so much that he kind of skedaddled out of Washington, D.C. before Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. He didn't stay around for it. But he also did not contest it. He basically said, I won in 96, but now I lost in 1800, and I'm leaving, and you're going to be the president. And we just sort of take that for granted. But in 1800, that was a big, big deal. So Jefferson's going to come in. He's going to realize that he starts off with his inaugural saying we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists, but he definitely has his own ideas of how he wants government to change under his leadership. So when he comes in, he decides that there's some certain things he wants to reduce. The biggest thing that was the same issue with Washington and Adams is now with Jefferson, and that is the national debt. The national debt is staggering, and he still wants to consider this to be a major thing that he's going to focus his presidency on dealing with, is to reduce this large burden that he feels could be weighing down the United States growth. And to do that, he's going to go after one major part of the president's budget, which is military spending. So he wants to reduce the size of the military because the military tends to be the biggest expenditure. And if in your reading you talked about 25 ships were on the plan, and he basically reduces it down to 7. And in so doing, he can reduce expenditures and hopefully get a handle on the debt. Now, we'll learn that in his presidency, in the terms, he is going to actually deal with some issues where he would need a very strong Navy. But he didn't know that when he came in. He was just trying to think of reduction of expenditures. And dealing with that, he also wanted to reduce just not only the size of the ships, but he wants to reduce the size of the government in general. He wants a smaller footprint of the federal government. Remember, he is a supporter of state power, not federal power, even though he's in position of it. So that's where he is in the first part of this. These are the 3 points that you should have. As he moved in, he also wanted to change some of the previous Federalist policies. He wanted them repealed, meaning to take away. He also would let some of the laws actually expire. We'll talk about that in a second. So when a new administration comes in, it's not that unusual for them to try and backtrack and change some of the things that happened in the previous administrations that they did not agree with. And so the first one was the idea of Alexander Hamilton's tax on whiskey. So basically they repeal the whiskey tax. Now, that sounds very good because you don't agree with it politically, but if you look here, the whiskey tax being gone is also less revenue that would be coming in to help you pay down the debt. So you can sort of see it's somewhat contradictory here. The other ones are easily found. They were the Alien and Sedition Acts, so people that were convicted under them, they were excused, their records were cleared, and also the naturalization was changed, and they went back to the original amount of time to become a citizen. In Jefferson's belief of a smaller federal government, he thinks and focuses on just 3 responsibilities that the federal government should deal with. Everything else should be the state's area of concern. So the first one was collecting custom duties. That means collecting taxes at the ports. That would be a way for the government to earn revenue. The other one is something we're still dealing with today, and that is the delivery of mail. That was essential for communications, for the growth of our country, so the government should take care of that and be efficient mail delivery. So that's another thing. And last but not least is the idea of conducting the census. Now the census is conducted once every 10 years. We count the population every 10 years. So the point is, when they do it in 1790, he doesn't want to focus on it again. It's in 1800, so by the time he comes in 1801, they're pretty much wrapping it up. It's not going to occur again until he's actually out of office. But that is the limit of what he feels the federal government should deal with. This next slide, yours looks a little different, but the questions are the same. So when Jefferson wins in the election of 1800, he wins in November. John Adams is not going to take over until March 4th, 1801. And from that time, John Adams and the Congress is known as a lame duck, meaning they know they're leaving, but they still have their powers. And so what John Adams does is that he gets his Federalist Congress to pass an act that expands the judiciary, that expands the courts, that create more courts throughout the country. And since he's President of the United States, he gets to select and appoint hundreds of Federalists to fill those positions. One of those would be a very important one, and that man's name is John Marshall. John Marshall was actually in his cabinet. I think he was Secretary of State at the time. But he appoints him to be Chief Justice, and he's going to be very influential because he's going to serve as Chief Justice for 34 years. That's why it's a very big deal when presidents get to appoint Supreme Court justices, because that's part of their legacy, basically what's going to be after them. And he is, and the rest of these people that are appointed at the last minute are known as midnight judges, because John Adams is literally sitting there in the last days of his presidency, quickly assigning these judgeships to Federalists and getting them out the door. Now, he got most of them out, but not all of them. So my next question was, what did Jefferson do about Adams' actions when he comes in? And what he does is he turns to his Secretary of State, which is James Madison, and he tells him not to deliver some of those job offers, some of those commissions. And one of the men just happened to know the Attorney General of the previous administration, and he says, you were supposed to get one, and this man's name was William Marbury. He did not receive his job offer. So what does he do? Marbury sues the government to basically get his job, and the person that he goes after is the person that was supposed to send it to him. So that's why the court case is known as Marbury versus Madison, because these are the two men in the court case. Now make sure on yours there were 2 short videos that you watch those videos, because they do a good job of summarizing and explaining this important concept. So in this, remember, you had to fill these out, and then some of you left this a little bit blank or a little bit, not so clear. So we're going to describe the importance of this Marbury versus Madison ruling. And so it's John Marshall. He's the Chief Justice, so he's going to write the opinion. And he basically states something that is very groundbreaking, and that is, he says that it's the Supreme Court's job, it's their responsibility to decide if actions of Congress, rules and laws are unconstitutional. And when he does this, he creates this power known as judicial review. Judicial review is not written in the Constitution. It is what is described as a custom that has been just part of our civics and the way that our government operates. So in Marbury versus Madison, this is so important because it's the first time that the court says it's their responsibility to judge the actions and laws of the other 2 branches of government. So they can basically rule laws that are created by Congress and signed by the President unconstitutional. They can also judge actions by the President of the United States as unconstitutional. And in class, we discussed some times in which they do that. So most recently, under the Trump presidency, when he officially tried to have an executive action that was banning certain people from coming in, the travel ban at the beginning of his presidency, the various courts stepped in and said that we're going to put a halt to it, what they call it a stay. So that is the way that your government and checks and balances work. So the next one is just something that's in the Supreme Court building. I believe this is where it is. It says, it is emphatically, meaning with great vigor and strength, the province Okay, the responsibility, duty, the job of the judicial department to say what the law is. That's what Marbury versus Madison established.